Daniel King looked like he had everything. A young billionaire, a huge house, expensive cars. But behind the doors of the King estate, there was a silence that money couldn't fix. Daniel was a widowed father, raising his twin sons, Jack and Noah, alone. His wife, Sarah, had died in a terrible accident when the boys were just babies. Since then, he built business empires by day, but drowned in emptiness at night. He hired nannies, dozens of them. None stayed. He fired them all for one reason or another. Too careless, too loud, too distracted. Nobody seemed right for his sons, so he stopped trusting anyone. Until Grace Miller walked in. Grace wasn't a nanny. She was just a housekeeper, a quiet woman in her late 20s who kept her head down and did her job. She cleaned the house, cooked simple meals, and didn't ask questions. She was there to work, not to replace anyone. Daniel never noticed her much. To him, she was just another staff member, someone who came and went without leaving a mark. At least, that's what he thought. One Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Daniel had a full day of meetings scheduled at his company, but one by one, they got canceled. By 2 p.m., he was free. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't call his driver. He didn't tell anyone he was going home early. He just got in his car and drove himself. The road was quiet. The sky was dull and gray. His heart felt heavy, as it often did when he thought of going home. The King estate sat at the end of a long driveway, tall and silent. When he stepped inside, something felt different. A faint scent floated in the air, floral, soft. It wasn't Sarah's perfume, not exactly, but close enough to stir old memories. He loosened his tie and walked deeper into the house. That's when he heard it. Laughter. Light, pure, belly-deep laughter. The kind that didn't come often in his house. It wasn't his laugh. It wasn't from a guest. It was his son's. Daniel froze. Jack and Noah didn't laugh like that with him. They barely laughed at all these days. A strange mix of curiosity and jealousy pushed him forward. He followed the sound down the hallway. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Two little voices giggling uncontrollably, water splashing, and a woman's voice humming a soft lullaby under her breath. The boys were giggling like they hadn't in months. Daniel's breath caught. The scene was so warm, so alive, it almost felt wrong. He hadn't hired her to care for his kids. She was the housekeeper, not the nanny. And yet, they looked so happy, so safe. A painful thought hit him. Were they looking at her that way because they were forgetting Sarah? He didn't know whether to step back quietly or confront her. His foot hit the tile harder than he meant, and Grace looked up, startled. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Daniel's voice came out sharper than he intended. "What are you doing?" Grace's hands froze. I'm sorry, sir. They were crying. Their foreheads felt warm. I couldn't find the thermometer. I thought a warm bath might help. I didn't mean to overstep. Daniel's voice rose without his permission. "You were bathing my kids in the kitchen sink, like they're yours." Her face went pale. "I wasn't trying to act like their mother. I just didn't want them to be uncomfortable," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady. Daniel looked at the boys. Jack was chewing on a wet washcloth, calm and happy. Noah was gazing up at Grace like she hung the moon. Something twisted in Daniel's chest. He couldn't remember the last time they looked that content. He stepped closer, his tone cold. "You're not their nanny. You're the housekeeper. You clean. You don't touch them." Grace flinched but didn't back away. "There was no one else here. They needed something. I couldn't just ignore them," she said, gripping the edge of the sink. Her words stung, not because she was wrong,
but because she was right. Daniel didn't respond. His throat felt tight. His sons were happy. Grace had done nothing wrong, but all he could feel was the loss of control, and control was the only thing holding him together since Sarah died. Finally, he muttered, "Towel them off, take them upstairs. We'll talk later." Grace nodded quietly and wrapped the boys in soft towels. Daniel noticed how gently she kissed Jack's damp hair, the same way Sarah used to. When she left the kitchen, Daniel stayed behind. The floor was wet in places. A tiny sock clung to the leg of the island. He picked it up and sat on a stool staring at it. His throat burned. He didn't cry, not yet, but something cracked inside him. He didn't know if he would fire Grace or thank her. All he knew was this: the house had felt more alive in the last 10 minutes than it had in months, and he didn't know what to do with that feeling.
The next morning, Grace moved quietly through the King estate. She didn't expect to stay long. She had seen this kind of silence before, the kind that comes right before someone tells you to leave. Daniel hadn't spoken to her after the sink incident. Not at dinner, not when she tucked the boys into bed. His eyes barely met hers. So, she started packing. Her suitcase was small, just enough to hold a few changes of clothes, her toothbrush, and a worn photo of her younger brother, David. She zipped it quietly, not wanting the sound to echo through the silent halls. She had crossed a line, and lines like that weren't forgiven in houses like this, not by men like Daniel King. But before she could leave, a sharp cry broke through the air. Then another. The twins. Grace dropped her hand from the doorknob and ran toward the nursery. Inside, Jack's face was flushed. His little body squirmed in discomfort. Beside him, Noah stirred, the same heat radiating from his skin. Grace's heart sank. Fever. She touched their foreheads, then turned as Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face tense. "It's the same fever from yesterday," Grace said quickly, not waiting for him to respond. "It's higher this time. They're breathing shallow. We can't wait. If they seize, it gets complicated fast." Daniel froze, unsure what to do. Grace didn't waste time. She scooped Jack into her arms and motioned for Daniel to take Noah. "Come on, we need to bring their temperatures down." Daniel followed her to the kitchen, still holding Noah awkwardly. Grace moved quickly, but carefully, preparing cool cloths and a simple electrolyte drink. "Strip them down to their diapers. Keep them upright. No ice-cold water. We lower the fever gradually." Daniel did as she said, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't used to feeling this helpless. Grace worked calmly, her movements sure and steady. "My brother used to spike fevers like this," she explained while tending to Jack. "I dropped out of nursing school to care for him full-time. You learn a few things when you have to." Daniel looked at her, surprised. He had never asked about her life, never cared to. She had always been just the housekeeper. But now, she was saving his boys. Minutes felt like hours. Slowly, the boys' breathing eased, the redness in their cheeks softened. Grace finally exhaled. "They're okay, for now." Daniel sat across from her, holding Noah against his chest. "What exactly did you just do?" he asked quietly. Grace shrugged. "I did what I had to, that's all." Her voice was steady, but Daniel noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. She had stayed up the entire night before, caring for them without complaint. He didn't know what to say. Thank you didn't feel like enough. That night the house was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Daniel passed by the nursery and stopped when he heard something unexpected. A song. Grace was singing softly, a lullaby he didn't recognize. Her voice was low, not loud enough to perform, just enough to soothe. The twins were asleep, their little chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Daniel stood outside the door, leaning against the wall. He didn't go in, he didn't speak, he just listened. It became a pattern. Every night, Grace sang that same song. Every night,
Daniel found himself stopping at the nursery door without meaning to. He didn't know the song, but it stayed in his head even when he wasn't near the room. It wasn't cheerful like Sarah's songs had been. It was gentle, almost sad, but it comforted in a different way. Days passed. The boys recovered. Their laughter returned. Then one afternoon, Daniel was walking past the laundry room when something slipped from a stack of blankets. He picked it up, a small, worn photograph. Grace was in the picture, smiling brightly. Beside her sat a boy in a wheelchair, grinning wide. Daniel stared at it. The boy must have been David, the brother she mentioned. She had never talked about him. She had never talked much about anything. Daniel carefully placed the photo back where he found it. For the first time, he realized he didn't know Grace at all. Later that evening, Daniel found her in the kitchen, rinsing bottles. "Grace?" he said, surprising himself. She turned, slightly startled. "Yes, sir?" He hesitated, then said, "You've done a lot for this house, for the boys, for me." Grace didn't respond right away, but something softened in her eyes. Daniel didn't add more. He didn't know how to. Instead, he reached for 2 mugs and poured tea. He handed one to her. It wasn't much, but for someone like Grace, it meant everything. She smiled faintly and took the cup. They drank in silence. That night, Daniel passed the nursery again. Grace's song filled the hallway. He leaned against the doorframe, listening. For the first time since Sarah's death, the house didn't feel empty. And Daniel King didn't feel completely alone.
Grace never planned to stay forever. She had taken the job to make ends meet, nothing more. But somewhere between the late-night fevers, the quiet lullabies, and the first time she saw Noah laugh, the King estate started to feel like home. Still, she kept a small suitcase in her closet, just in case. One morning, she opened her email and froze. It was from Riverbend Community School. They were offering her a part-time position in early childhood development. It wasn't glamorous. The pay wasn't great, but it was her dream. Years ago, before her brother David's illness, she had wanted to work with children. Nursing school had been her plan, but life had other ideas. Now the door she thought had closed forever was open again. She should have been thrilled, but when she glanced toward the nursery, her chest tightened. She thought about Jack reaching for her when he woke up. She thought about Noah's quiet giggles during story time. Leaving them felt impossible. For days, she didn't say anything. Daniel noticed she was quieter, distracted. He didn't ask. Part of him was afraid of the answer. He had fired every nanny before her, but Grace was different. She wasn't just someone doing a job. She had become part of the boy's world, and part of his. But he didn't know how to tell her that. One evening, as Grace was tucking the boys into bed, she noticed Jack's forehead was warm again. By midnight, Noah was coughing. Daniel panicked. The helplessness he had felt before came rushing back. Grace, as always, moved calmly, checking temperatures, mixing fluids, keeping them upright. Daniel watched her, the fear in his chest replaced by something else, something like clarity. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the reason his boys felt safe, and the reason the house felt alive again. 2 nights later, Daniel found himself standing outside the nursery door, holding a letter. Not just any letter, a letter from Sarah. He had discovered it earlier that evening in her old room, in a box she had left for him. It was labeled, "In case I'm not there." The words inside broke him. Sarah had written about the boys, about how she knew he'd be a good father, even if he doubted himself. She wrote, "Don't close the door to love just because it doesn't look like what we had. Let them laugh, even if I'm not there to hear it." Daniel read that line again and again, and then he knew what he had to do. The next morning, he called Grace into the kitchen. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure. Daniel motioned for her to sit. He said, "I need to talk to you." His voice was calm, steady. Grace sat down, waiting. Daniel looked at her directly. He said, "I want you to stay. Not just for another week, not until the next crisis.
I want you here long term. Grace blinked, surprised. Daniel continued, You've done more for these boys than anyone else could. You've loved them like they're your own. They need you. And he paused, his throat tightening. I need you here too. Grace's eyes softened. And the school? She asked gently. Daniel smiled faintly. If you still want to go back to school, I'll sponsor you. You can work here and study. You don't have to choose between your dream and them. Grace looked down at her hands. You're asking me to be part of the family? Daniel's voice dropped. You already are, Grace. The boys have chosen you. I just want to make sure you know I have too. Her throat tightened. She had been invisible for so long, but here she was seen. Months passed. Grace stayed. The boys grew stronger. The house grew warmer. And then one bright afternoon, the whole family sat in the auditorium of Riverbend Community School. Naomi Miller, no longer just the housekeeper, walked across the stage in her cap and gown. Daniel sat in the back clapping hard with Jack and Noah holding posters that read, Go Mom, and We Love You, Grace. Grace spotted them instantly. Her smile widened. That evening they returned to the King estate. Dinner was simple, just cake, pizza, and laughter. Later, as the boys got ready for bed, Noah climbed into Grace's lap. Can you sing the old song, Mommy? He asked. Grace glanced at Daniel. He nodded. She began to sing, the same lullaby she had sung on nights filled with fevers, tears, and hope. Her voice was steady now, full, alive. Jack and Noah's eyes closed as the melody wrapped around them. Daniel leaned against the doorway, listening. When the song ended, Noah's voice broke the silence. Can you sing it again? Grace smiled softly. Always. Daniel stepped into the room, his voice quiet but sure. We're a family, he said. Doesn't take blood, just courage. Grace met his eyes. No tears, just a deep understanding. The boys didn't fully grasp the meaning of his words, but they didn't have to. They had already been living the truth of it all along. The house that had once been filled with silence now rang with laughter, music, and life. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel King didn't feel like a man holding his family together. He felt like a man who finally had one.
If you were touched by this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us in sharing good stories that matter. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.